All right, I'm going to take this sticky down, but if anybody needs it, I could pull it back up. How do I? All right, so today we're going to be focused down here in this corner, and I'm sorry it's small. I wish I could make it bigger, but I can. And in a way, the beauty of these devices is the fact that they're so tiny. So with Live 12, one of the things that they introduced are these things called MIDI tools. And basically the idea is that instead of having a MIDI effect or a MIDI device that sits in the chain and receives kind of a flow of MIDI in real time or generates a flow of MIDI in real time, instead we could have devices that basically perform sort of batch operations on the contents of the MIDI clip. So right now I'm here in a MIDI track and I have a MIDI clip that's blank. And we'll just start with this rhythm device, which is actually bundled with Live 12. And there's two categories. There's generators and transformers. This is a generator, and all that means is that it allows us to generate MIDI information inside of a MIDI clip, like that. I'm going to turn scales off for now because I'm actually working with a drum plugin right now. Oops, I don't want this amen break quite yet. But I have to make sure that our instrument understands. This one starts at B sharp 2, or whatever, B2. So let's see here. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch over to a pitched instrument so that I can actually give you sound.
You've got volume there to your right there, the interface.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So we're just generating a basic rhythmic pattern here. And the idea behind these devices is basically that if you can imagine something related to composition, if you can imagine a type of pattern or a type of melody or a way in which you would transform one of those two things, then we could have a really basic device that does that. So in this particular case, we just have kind of this simple pattern generator, right, which allows us to get a bunch of different types of rhythmic patterns very quickly and very easily without having to manually kind of click them into the grid. Another category, and sort of a different device, one that I made, this one's called phase pattern. So this one is all based around the idea that I might want to be able to produce a rhythm that actually doesn't fit very cleanly into the grid. I might want to be able to produce a rhythmic pattern that actually speeds up over the course of the clip, for example. So if I have this device here where this line basically represents kind of the time at which, or the speed at which time is flowing within the clip. So where the line is steeper, we have kind of wider spacing between these events, and where the line is shallower, we have more rapid spacing of events. So the result is something like this. So we get this kind of bouncing ball effect. We could stretch that back the other way. And there's also a lot of other different shapes that we can explore. And then we can use similar of these playful kind of functions to manipulate the pitch as well as the velocity. And now I'm going to turn the scale back on. Because in Live 12 we have scales now, and these devices are actually scale away, so they're going to stay in key. So if I wanted to switch to, I don't know, like E flat minor pentatonic, and then giving ourselves a little bit of a velocity. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this clip about 4 times longer. And I'm going to generate more notes. So before I was generating 8, now let's do 32. And you can see I have this kind of like sine wave shape that's representing the melody that we have here for the pitch, but I'm actually going to basically produce more of those sines so that we go through that melody more quickly over the same amount of time. And so we can very quickly generate ideas here. And some of these may be things that you want to use directly in music. Sometimes it's just a starting point. And then the same goes for this one. We'll increase these iterations so that instead of this whole thing being velocity, one big sine wave of velocities, I know that's kind of low, it's probably hard to see, we're actually doing several of these and giving ourselves a little bit of variation. With this one, we can also quantize the notes that get generated, so that rather than having this kind of very unquantized, wonky, off-the-grid thing, we're actually using this weird shape here as the kind of seed for a pattern. Let's try with a drum instrument. I'm just going to grab this 808 kit here, and I'm just going to generate a clip here. And let's see what we get. And we need to come down in pitch just a little bit. So we'll do C1 to, there we go. So now we're in the range that this drum rack actually cares about. And then from there we can kind of elaborate on different ideas. So this particular device came from a lot of work that I do on the Max side. Why does that, am I doing that? I don't know. Where basically we think about time in terms of a signal that looks a lot like this. So the way to think about this is basically, we could think about time as, let me just pull it up in Max really quickly. I didn't expect to get into Max, but have to do it. So we think about time a lot of the time in Max as a signal that looks a little bit like this. So this kind of ramp. And if I wanted, so we could think about this ramp as being, so 0.5 hertz. This is like a sawtooth waveform at a really low frequency, 0.5 hertz. And at 0.5 hertz, this ramp will go from 0 to 1 over 1 bar in 4/4 time. So we can think about this ramp as being basically like a unit of time. And by doing some really simple math that's embedded inside this other object, which is called subdiv, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see things a little more clearly. We're going to, for every one of these big ramps, produce 8 smaller ramps. And we can even kind of get a count of those as they come out. So we're taking this initial kind of source of time, and then we're just slicing it up. We can, from these shorter ramps, we could turn them into a stream of impulses, which is just nice for being able to kind of see what the spacing between them looks like. And we could imagine these being kind of the grid of time. We could also even generate a MIDI note, which let me do that really quickly. So I'm going to send MIDI to live. Right now I'm sending it to that goofy piano. But if I take this, this same little mallet instrument that we had, we've basically made a B6 sequencer in Max already for every one of these pulses. Now what's really cool, we already talked about this being the the bar, right? And we can think about the slope of this line, like how steep or shallow it is, as representing sort of the speed at which time is flowing within our music. So if we change the slope of that line as it goes, we're going to change the spacing in between those events. So I'm going to insert an object in here called twist. And I'm going to change this attribute of that object called curve, which is going to introduce this exponential curve to this ramp. So now we're getting a tighter spacing between those events towards the end. And we have this kind of, what in music they would call a rallentando. In a similar vein, swing. So we could think of swing, right? When we think about swing, it's like every other eighth note is kind of pushed back a little bit, right? And a way that we could think about that is basically this kind of stair-stepped kinking, almost like the handrail on a staircase that has flat parts in it. So if I add a little swing, you might be able to see here there's this kind of subtle back and forth in terms of the slope of this line, which is causing these guys to change and the spacing in between these to change. So some of the ideas that I'm working with here are basically translations of these ideas that I sort of had been messing around with in Max and that I make all these YouTube videos about into the live environment. So if we come back now to this device here, you can really see the relationship there in terms of this idea that as we change the shape of this line, we're actually sort of able to change our notion of time over the course of this MIDI clip. Does everybody, I guess first question, yeah, go.
I was going to ask you how to install those.
Great question. I should have told you already. So if you've downloaded them from this link already, all you got to do is go into your user library. And then go to, if there's not a folder called MIDI Tools already, you can just create it and just stick them in there. And unfortunately, the link there, they don't let you download them in a zip, which is a big complaint that I have with the Gumroad people, but it's how it is. But anyway, you download them, put them in here, and then they'll start to show up in these menus over here. So right now we've been looking, oh, does that cover? I'll give you all a little bit of time to do that. And I'll take any other questions while everybody works on that.
MIDI tool from that link which you've been playing in?
This one's called Phase Pattern. Yeah, it's up here.
What's the folder?
MIDI Tools. I'll write that in the little sticky here.
Can I ask just everyone, if you have a question, we want to capture it on the recording. Just give us a sec to bring you a mic and then just speak into the microphone. Sorry.
Oh, cool.
You have a couple mics here.
All right. So when you download these, you're going to get you'll get several devices. There's, I think, 13 of them in that particular link. Maybe 14 now. And there's two types. So there's the generators, which we've been looking at, right? These devices that actually just spit a bunch of MIDI out into the clip. And there's a few things to kind of talk about in terms of the mechanics of these things. So the first is, how do you actually get to this? So you just create a blank MIDI clip. The way I usually do it is just, you can do it in arrangement view or session view. I usually just double click in whatever this one is, session view. That creates a blank MIDI clip. And then over here in this pane, sometimes it looks like this, if it's vertical like this, so you have these kind of expanding sections, or if you just drag this out, it orients itself differently. And the generators are this rightmost tab. And by default, you'll have this generate button is going to be turned on. If that's turned off, then any changes that you make in the device aren't going to do anything until you click this tiny button over here, which will then actually do it. But I find almost always it's just way more intuitive to leave that on, and then I can exactly see what's going on, what's happening in the clip. And the result basically is this sequencer where you have an incredible UI where you can really clearly see what the sequencer is doing, which I think is this kind of problem that sequencers have always had that maybe we weren't totally aware of, that like they're not very good at depicting to you what the actual thing looks like, right? This makes that very easy. You basically are able to just take advantage of the sort of presentation that Live's already giving you. So if we go back to this original one that we had, now that this is in place and we've generated something, what I'll very often do is just duplicate it. So Option drag and make a new one on a new slot. And then we'll transform this. So the goal here is very often, in my case, to basically get some variation on a pattern I've already generated. Maybe I've found my way to something I like. Maybe I've played it in. Maybe I've typed it in manually. Maybe I've generated it. And now I actually want to make some changes to that. So that's where these transformation devices come in. So transformers they take in whatever's already in the clip, and they let you mess with it. So the one we'll start with here is called, well, let's keeping our analogy actually. So we talked about swing. This one called feel. So say we wanted to have a little bit of swing. What we can do basically is we set our grid here. So 16th notes, 8th notes, whatever you want to do. Let's do 16th notes. And then we can add some swing. And that's actually going to shift those notes as if we were kind of warping the underlying grid the way that we were doing with the line in Max. That's kind of the way that I think about these things is swing isn't really transformation to notes, it's a transformation to time. This device, which is called Feel, also has like an advanced mode where we have a bunch of sliders, and each slider pertains to a different grid line in the clip. So I can actually draw a little shape here and then shift according to those changes. So if the slider is up, it's pushing the note back. If the slider is down, it's pushing the note forward in time. And so this is how you can get like micro timing or any kind of groove you want, right? There's like a humanize feature that's built into Live that'll kind of just like smudge things off the grid. This is a way to basically dial that in exactly how you want it and get just a little bit of feel. I find in particular with this one, a little goes a long way, right? We could actually start with something really basic, like just a straight pulse at, let's do 16th notes here. So we'll come down to, oops, this one. We'll come back to this device and just add in a little bit of this humanization. And this is a lot, but if we did just a little, you barely can tell, but it's there. There's just a little bit of dequantization going on there, which allows us to kind of get a little bit less robotic when that's what we want. Sometimes robotic is great. Coming back to this example, a few more of these transformations. So another one that I really like is subdivision, kind of as an idea. So this idea basically says, I'm going to take, actually let's start with the simpler example, which is here. And we'll do eighth notes. Actually, we'll do quarter notes over 2 bars. Okay, so again, starting with this. And what I'm basically going to do is selectively slice up some of these, kind of like ratchets. So I'm going to give myself 4 sliders. And I have 4 sliders, so it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. But if I did like maybe 3, I'd get a rhythm like that. And then similar to the other one where we were able to change the pitch and the velocity with these kind of weird little function generators, we can do the same thing here. We need a kick. There we go. And the velocity as well. And the velocity is cool because if we have, let's say, do 0 and 0 again, so no pitch, which in this case is the sample, we can get these nice little rolls. With the velocity. So if we were to come back, say, to something a little bit more complex. You can very quickly start to generate variations on things, right? So your original pattern might not have had these retriggers or subdivisions or whatever you want to call them. But then you're like, oh, I want to cut out to something, a little fill, something a little bit different. This is a really, really quick and easy way to do that. And of course, we can even get it to change the sample over that. And you just play around with it and find something that works. Any questions?
Actually, yes. It's not working. Is it on? It's working? I have a question. Can you automate those parameters?
No.
You cannot.
Yeah, so this is like the
Bummer.
number one question. Always the first question is like, can I get my MIDI control? One, can I map my MIDI controller? Can I map an LFO? Can I, no. So no push. Unfortunately not. They don't support those. I think mainly because they kind of view these as like a batch process, like something you do offline, which is kind of unlive-like. Right? Like live is this performance tool. It's this improvisational kind of intuitive thing. So many people are asking for it that I'm hoping that they introduce something along those lines. And I think it kind of gets at to the idea that they're kind of reinventing how sequencing could work in live with this feature. So definitely I hope there's a push, kind of a push integration at some point. And modulation is just something people keep asking about, so hopefully that comes as well, but not right now. Let me show you a few other of these, and then maybe we can play around with them. For those that are on Live 12, somebody can even come up here and just mess around, have some playtime. So another device that or kind of a family of devices, are again based on this idea of subdivision. So I was messing around with rhythms. I learned about this sort of way of thinking about rhythms, which is instead of having just a grid. Like instead of thinking about time as being a series of steps along a grid, like on a step sequencer, right? Like on a 808 or something. And those events are on or off. Instead, we could actually just think about some amount of time and then like slicing that amount of time into chunks. So actually, let's go over to collision. And this device, like the other one, has this bank of sliders. But it works a little bit differently. Basically, the set of sliders, the number of sliders is going to give you how many notes get created. So if we start, and then the height of each slider sets the sort of like proportional length of each of these. So because we moved this second slider up, we got a longer second note. And this can get weird real fast. Like these ideas, you can find them in Armenian music, you can find them in Indian classical music. From there, we can then apply some subdivisions. And really start to end up with some strange stuff. You can also just use it as a basic building block for quantized rhythms because there is a quantized button. So again, just a really quick way to be like, I need a rhythmic pattern. I'm going to play around with these sliders, and that's going to give me all of these different ways of getting out of rhythm. And then from there, and again, quantization gives us something a little more conventional. I'll show you one more transformation. So one thing I found myself wanting to do was basically be able to like remove density from a pattern, right? I might start with something that's kind of complex and maybe I want to be able to like build up to that, or I want to be able to break down from that, or maybe I just like something but there's just too much shit going on and I want to take stuff out. So I came up with this idea, which is basically this idea that we could like apply a pattern to these notes and then use that pattern to choose which notes to just get rid of. So that's what this device can do, among many other things. So on the top here, I have basically some basic settings that allow me to generate a pattern. And then on the bottom, I have this section that allows me to decide what that pattern does. So in this case, we're using it to delete notes. Now we're keeping all of them because we have a full pattern here. Or we could start to get rid of some. So if we were to start with our original idea, let's say, we'll clone, and then just get rid of some. And then we'll do one more clone here. That's the original again, but I'm going to do just a variation on that pattern. So all I did was just shift this pattern to the right a little bit. And then if we take these three, select them, if I can actually see them. Oh, I screwed up. I didn't copy it, but anyway. We'll do a follow action, and we'll have them switch off between the two. And so you can imagine as you keep doing this, right, keep generating, keep transforming, you get all these variations, and then using follow actions or laying them out in the arrangement view or whatever, then you can really start to work your way towards something that has some life to it, that has some variety to it. I think that one of the biggest challenges a lot of the time is kind of getting from that really awesome initial idea that you might have generated, right? You're like, oh, this beat is awesome. I want to turn this into actual piece of music that's like worthy of someone's 4 minutes, right? And I think that's kind of a lot of time where the hard part comes in music making. And so some of these tools, the idea is to give you tools for the rest of that process. How can I start from this thing that I already have and and start to get some variations on it, or some sort of different versions of it that allow me to actually turn this single idea into an arrangement. There's one last thing I want to show you before we just play around. So after I basically made 12 of these, released them on the day that Live 12 came out, and then I had a lot of people who were like, basically had ideas. Because one of the things that's amazing about this sort of family of tools is they're really small, and they're really simple, and they're just kind of is like one idea in each of them. And so could be as many of them as there are ideas about how to make rhythms and melodies and how to transform rhythms and melodies. So people started to come along and be like, I have this idea, can you help me make it? And one of those people was this guy, Duncan Ned Rush, who has a YouTube channel that's really, really good. He's an Ableton CT and a Max CT, and he is really knowledgeable about like UK music, like jungle and stuff like that. So he came and he was like, I'm working on, he's doing this series of videos at the time where over the course of a month, every day, he made a video about a different break. And he went from A to Z, different breaks that started with those letters. Starting, of course, with the Amen break on the first day. And basically every day he chopped a break, kind of showed the process for how to do that in live. And then he came to me with this idea, which was basically making a device that would automate the process of kind of reshuffling the slices of that break. So what I have here is an Amen. And you know what? Something's totally wrong here, which is we need to be at a faster BPM. Great. So I'm going to come to this device called Phrase Shuffler. And the thing that Duncan said that was really an incredible piece of information was in jungle music and drum and bass music, the crucial thing these guys did that allowed them to keep a kind of musicality was they would reshuffle these slices in groups of 3/8 notes. That was how they did it. So what he did was he said, hey, could we have a thing where you could actually say, like, what is the size of these chunks of slices or these groups of slices that you want to have, and then just have a way to kind of randomize them. And it's basically instant, like, drum and bass. He also had this other break that I'd never heard. That's called Bebop Boogie that I want to play. So people are pretty excited about this, and now we're working on this other one, which I'm going to show you. I don't think anybody has seen this outside of us, but I'm just going to show you. So this new version where basically we can control very precisely where each slice goes. or this like advanced shuffling feature where there's some randomness involved, but we actually have like probabilities. So there's one slider for each group of 3, and then the height of the slider says the sort of likelihood that that slice will appear in the result. So if I bring all of them down except for one, I'm just going to get the same thing over and over again. But if I bring one up, then I can, and there's still a little bit of randomness. So if I just re-trigger, that time it actually did give me the same one over and over again, just because that's how the dice rolled that time. Although it seems like maybe I have a bug, because this is still a prototype. So that one's coming in the future, and I'm really excited about that one. It's amazing for breaks, but it's also like for anything that you might be doing. You're like, oh, I need a variation of this. I want the same stuff, but just scrambled around. I even put this like variance thing in here, which will basically say it'll generate this kind of scrambled copy, but then it will like mix that with the original one. So if you're like, oh, I want this to be a little bit different from the thing I already had, then you can do that too. So this one I'm like very excited about.
Question. What's the host instrument? Is it in sampler?
Oh yeah, I can show you that. So yeah, this Ned Rush guy is a genius. So basically what you do is, I'll start from the beginning of the process. So he starts with the break. This is just like from wherever. He warps it. So he manually comes in and warps the transients to the grid, which you don't necessarily have to do, but I think typically works a little bit better. And then he actually bounces it. So this is the bounce of the warped sample. And then you just go slice a new MIDI track. And then you have some options. You could do transient, you could whatever. Eighth note I find to be the most straightforward. And then once you do that, you now have all of the slices of the break laid out on a MIDI clip, and it's a drum rack with simplers probably. Simplers. Yeah. So like, I don't know. I think the possibilities there are pretty endless. Like, you don't have to use old breaks either. You could sample some like Indian raga tabla playing, or like some person jamming on the udu, or whatever you like. I think there's a ton of potential there. Anything else? Questions?
I was just wondering if there's any that you find particularly useful for like melodic or harmonic variations as opposed to.
I'm more of a rhythm person.
Yeah.
But
like just if there's any that you would suggest to play with. For that.
So there are a bunch in the Ableton one that are good for that, for sure. There's one that I'm working on right now, which is it's all about chord inversions. So you could start with a chord progression. It detects where the chords are, and then it allows you to perform inversions of those. So that one's pretty fun. And then the pattern transform, which I showed you a little while ago. So if we just let's start with this. And we come back to pattern transform. So this was the one that we used before to delete some notes. Mm-hmm. But this one actually has a bunch of modes. And the idea basically is that within the kind of activated steps of this pattern, we're going to, in this case, let's say transpose. Oh, actually, that sounded okay. Hell yeah. So we could transpose the notes that fall within the windows of the pattern. And you could also, it also has this accumulation feature, which basically means that we're going to, instead of just adding 2 to each, we're going to add 2 to the first one, then 4 to the next one, then 6 to the next one.
If you have the tuning turned on, will it stay like in the
Yeah.
key? Cool.
Yeah. So Live has this scales feature. So right now I'm set to this E flat minor pentatonic, and these devices that I've made, they're all going to respect the scale if the scale is turned on over here for the clip. Because I actually was talking to Ableton recently. It's a little confusing how this works. You have this up here, but really the scales are like a clip level thing. And you can actually have different scales for different clips, which I don't know why you would necessarily want to do that, but you can turn them off, which is really great, because if you have, say, a drum rack or like a VST that Live doesn't know is a drum instrument, but actually is, you're not going to want to have that on. So the device is smart and it knows if this is turned on or not, and if it is, it will keep everything in the key that you're using. And yeah, there's a lot to play around with on this one. So that would be one. Let me think if there's any others. This one, so this one's like basic as hell, but I find it actually pretty useful. So the idea is I have a bank of sliders and I just use them to offset the pitch or the velocity or the chance, which like obviously you could always do like this. But I just find sometimes it's really nice to have something that's really quick and easy to use. So if I just play this again, let's turn the drums off right for a sec. I can just like introduce some quick transpositions by just touching these sliders. Again, this is going to be in key. And it has these kind of relative, right now it's in relative mode, which basically means it's just transposing from wherever the note actually is. But you can also put it in absolute mode where it will transpose from some note that you set, which in this case is going to be C3. So you can kind of use it either way. And I use this one all the time, particularly for velocity. If I'm like, oh, I just need to switch these up. I don't really care which one is which. I'm just going to like give a little bit of sort of life to this. It's an easy and quick way to do that. So that'd be another one that is great for that.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Hey, so I've got a question that's kind of coming from a piano player's perspective. So most of the time when I'm putting in my notes, I'm playing them on a keyboard, and I'm capturing the way that I actually kind of play a chord.
Right.
Sometimes, though, I need to write in a chord progression.
Yeah.
And I have a variety of workarounds to make the timing of any given chord just slightly not on grid.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's a way that you could detect chords versus single notes
Yeah.
and then shift only the chorded notes very subtly.
So Ableton actually did that.
Nice.
So I'll start by generating a chord progression. There's a device called Stacks. We'll just do some random chord progression here. And then there's one called Strum. Which maybe this isn't exactly what you're saying, but the idea is the idea that the chord is being strummed, so we can actually do like that.
Okay.
We could also randomize that, not with this device, but that's a thing we could do.
Okay.
I have another device, which I don't think is on here right now, but yeah, it's like this inverter, and chord detection's not that easy, right? Because if you were to say, like, let's start with, so there's a device called Seed, that's another one of the Ableton ones, that just gives you like random gobbledygook, right? And like, obviously if you're playing a chord in, it's not going to look like this, but the device has to kind of cover these edge cases. Like, where are the chords here? So the approach that we're going to, I think, take on that one is basically it's going to say, so a chord will start here, and any notes that overlap with, let's say, the first half of this one, that start within the first half of this one, will be included in its chord. So if I were to make this longer and be like, that one's included, but maybe like this one isn't because it doesn't start at the 50% mark, and then you can say like what that point is. And so from there, then you could have it say, okay, now that we've recognized what the chord is, we could shift those positions of where those start, which I think is what you said you wanted to do.
Yeah, slightly. I just wanted to feel like when my fingers fall on the keyboard, just the timing isn't robotic.
Yeah.
They're just slightly different timings.
It's a great idea.
On Ableton, when all three notes hit at exactly the same time,
Yeah.
it sounds brighter, louder. It sounds just dynamically different than if I can separate them by milliseconds.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
So,
For sure. Yeah, one thing, this other one I'm excited about. It's inversions, and then the guy I'm working with also, he's kind of the like conceptual one behind this. He has this idea of like being able to stretch a chord. So basically we just like take the chord, duplicate it an octave above and an octave below, and then give you like one knob that lets you kind of change the like velocity distribution across those. So you could say like, oh, am I getting all of just that middle original one, or am I getting like more of the upper octave and lower octave, or am I getting even? And you can kind of basically change sort of the like spectral balance of that. So there's a lot you can do with chords, and I feel like that's another feature to include, if not in that device, and in another one, it's just a little bit of this humanization. It's great. Thank you. If I get your email, I'll make sure you get that one for free. Any other ideas? I love to hear thoughts. Any problems that you find yourself having, like any stuff that you're doing that's really cumbersome and tedious to do manually that you do a lot? I'm always interested to hear.
I'd say like the main two for me is working with hi-hats. Like it seems like with some of the tools that you have, it's possible. I'm just not sure exactly yet. Like splitting hi-hats relatively easy, or also working with like arpeggiating like the strum function in Ableton in a way, like working with guitars. You know what I mean? Like if I had three notes that was on the piano roll, if I wanted to strum those and then effectively like duplicate those quickly, like you could in some DAWs, I think those are like two things that me personally I work with.
I want to see you do that in a little bit.
All right, cool.
I'm curious about that one. There is like an arpeggiate that I think that live Ableton made. I think it starts with a chord as the input, and then it'll just arpeggiate that chord. So that's like one thing, but I'd love to see exactly what you're talking about. On the hi-hat use case, so if we start from the hi-hat, which is at A#1, that's the open hat. I want the closed. And then we go to the divs one. And I have 8 hats here, so I'll just make 8 sliders. And then I want to just chop these up. So that's a pretty quick way to do that. So this one's called divs. Yeah. And this is the one where you could even have the velocity change over the course of that. So you can have it almost like a echo. Or you could flip that. So it's rising. The velocity is rising. Or you can do like a undulation. You can also generate on top of stuff you already have. So if we clone this, just so we can keep it, and then we'll go back to phase pattern, and we'll make, what are you doing? So you can build stuff iteratively like that as well by just working on top of what you've already got. This might be a good place to like take some stuff out too. So if we do pattern transform, we'll do the delete mode. This is also another good place for this other one, which is very similar. It's called condition transform. So this one basically says, based upon some condition, use that as the criterion by which I will select which notes will get transformed. So my condition right now is the pitch. So I'm going to select the lower pitch, which I know is the kick. And then I'm just going to, offset some of those. And it'd be cool if there was a way to kind of only select some of those. That's an idea that I should definitely do. Oh, there we go. So now we just got to like a pattern pretty quick. So yeah, once you kind of get an intuition for these, the thing that I find myself doing all the time is just like I make a clip, clone it, transform it, clone that, transform that, and really just build a live set or a track really, really quickly that way. Any other thoughts, ideas, questions? Get that mic.
You were saying use cases. So a lot of times when I'm making house, I'll get stuck trying to make sort of like a fill for the end of a phrase. Whether that's a snare fill or a rim fill or a clap variation. And often I want it to have a lot of velocity to it because it's either like tightening up or sort of falling out.
Yeah.
I usually end up chopping up a break or something like that, but it'd be cool to know how to build that feeling that I want more with MIDI.
For sure, yeah. So, I mean, you can start with what, something resembling the pattern that you already got as your main pattern, and then use any one of these kind of transformations to change that. You could also start with something totally fresh. For that higher velocity, usually the way I work with velocity is usually just get something and then transform the velocity after the fact. So the draw is a really good one for that, where you can just be like, oh, I want to bring the velocity up on all of these. And you just like draw these sliders above the center line. I'm also working on one that I found I needed, which was, if you've ever used the velocity MIDI effect. So let's look at that. So the idea, it's way down here. Let me just do this. The idea behind this guy is like, it's gonna basically shape the velocity range. So we have 0 to 127. Let me play some stuff through here. We'll start with something at a low velocity. And we need, so something quiet. We're at like we're at like 20, velocity of 20. So this device, this is a MIDI effect. but it will let us do stuff like clamp the range. So now that even though I'm sending through 20, let me get a MIDI monitor in here. So the velocities that are coming in are 40, 20, whatever. But the ones that are going out are in the 90 range because I just shifted what the bottom possible is. You can also do stuff like this compression or drive. So it's just like these ways of thinking about this like a graph where the input x-axis is the velocity that comes in, and then the y-axis is the velocity that ends up going out. So I'm going to make something very similar to this for the MIDI tools so that you can have that same type of control where you're like, I just want to bring the energy of this whole thing up, right? That's hopefully really easy to do. Or I want to like in the case of the compression example, we have this idea of like, I only want very low velocities or very high velocities, and I don't want a lot in the middle, right? Or I would like to kind of like normalize everything and like squash those velocities down to like some middle range. So it's a pretty useful kind of just tool in your toolbox. And then you have this ability, what I think I love about these MIDI tools so much is like, I don't have to put everything into one device. I can have a bunch of mechanisms for generating those fills and then be like, okay, narrowly for the part about what I want the velocity to be doing at this particular part in the track, I have lots of control over that. So you can have a clip that's like your fill clip that maybe you use a few times, but like over the course of the track, as the track builds, the intensity and the sort of density and the activity within that clip increases. And that's a really easy thing to do very quickly. Any others? Cool. All right, so I figured we're here until 8, as long as people want to stick around.
Maybe 7:45. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, let's just play around. I'll kind of walk around. If anybody wants to jump up here, I'm more than happy to have somebody just like mess around and we could talk through it. Or if you want to just work on your own machines, go for it.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Maybe you explained this earlier, maybe you didn't, but how did you get into building Max for live devices?
It's curiosity, really. Like I broke my arm in 2016. I had like a landlord that put this like ladder in my apartment for me to get up to my bedroom, and I fell off the ladder. So I was like in bed, like I broke my, I had to have surgery, and I was just like fucked up for a while. So I watched this course on Max. And then it wasn't for like another year that I actually started making stuff in there, because I was like pretty confused. And I felt the same way about live when I learned live even. And then just over time, like just out of curiosity, kept playing around in there, and then slowly got to a point where it's most of what I'm doing. I find for me, like it's way easier to make devices or tinker with kind of ideas around music production technique than it is for me to actually make music. So like the thing that I think I probably contribute way more than any music that I make is like tools and techniques. I really admire those that can like, and I've made music, but I really admire somebody who can just like every day sit down and like go through the pretty wrenching, like challenging process of actually creating art. It's to me, way easier to like get to focus on technical problems most of the time. So.
Do you ever make videos about creating your devices?
Yeah, so there are some. I'm gonna build a course on this, because I showed you this Max patch, and this is sort of the conceptual foundation for what's happening in these. But this is actually very different, sort of, the mechanics of this are very different from what's actually happening inside of these devices. So I will be putting together a course specifically on how to do these MIDI tool devices. And then, you know, I've already got lots of videos on making sequencers, and I probably need to do some like how to make those Max for Live sequencers videos as well. But
Do you design the like how it
yeah,
kind of interface too?
yeah. And that is a lot of JavaScript, because there's like so you have like some basic kind of built-in UI objects like number boxes and stuff, but for this kind of more custom stuff, you can actually write your own in JavaScript if you know any JavaScript, or if you know an AI that happens to know JavaScript. Yeah, that's real. Like that's also the other thing is like, I'll show you these. These are like 90% JavaScript code. So like most of this thing is in here. Is all in here. And like, I'll just be like, am I on the internet right now? Yeah, I'll be like, please write me a function that will, I don't know, randomize the default velocity variable. So yeah, and it's sick too, because then you're like, oh, I'm a person that has weird ideas about how music could be made, but maybe I don't exactly like have the programming skills, or like I'm shaky on those, or like it's hacky and I'm just not very good at that part. The AI has really been helpful for that, just like writing better, more solid code. So that's cool.
Hey, so could we use what you're doing for video clips as well as audio clips?
Oh, no. I don't think so.
You could in the Evo suite, maybe. Do you have the Evo suite?
I do.
Yeah, I bet you could.
Does MIDI control the video?
You can.
There is.
Yeah, there's a
I've
MIDI.
seen some
There's a,
stuff
there.
like
I just met up with the guy at Jurgen, and he's like, there's a device.
Yeah.
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 So that's one thing I was thinking, but I think
Nice.
you can.
Cool.
Damn, I would love
Let's chat about that.
If you're gonna play with that, I would love
Yeah.
a clip
Oh yeah.
for my social media.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that's. Oh, have you guys played with that thing? I haven't played with it, but it's called like Video Sync or something.
Video sync.
There's a thing called Video Sync that's by these Dutch guys that is like, I don't know. I guess like people will do whole live shows, visuals from live.
There's a suite called Evo Suite. They're located
Similar
in,
thing?
Well, they're also in the Netherlands.
What
and
is
they
it with
turn
these
live
Dutch?
into a video production suite. So, but it integrates with your music or your live set. So you literally will like drag any effect or device onto a clip, and it's a video clip.
Wow.
It's really wild.
And then MIDI is telling that thing what to do.
You could do MIDI or audio. It works with audio too.
Damn.
Well, have you guys seen I think Imogen Heap used some like Max for Live devices to do like visual with her gloves in her hands.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
was
that's like classic Max.
yeah,
Yeah, like
it's pretty wild.
the whole kind of like I'm doing this project right now for this artist that's kind of unrelated, but it's like they have a live set, they have an instrument rack with a bunch of macros that like talk to parameters all over their set. Like they've mapped everything really nicely. And then they have this like fabric that like will sit in the gallery and people will interact with the fabric, and the fabric has some sort of like sensitive filament embedded in it, like woven into it. And this filament will then tell the computer like how the fabric is being used or moved. And so then they want the movement of the fabric to control the parameters of this live set that they have. So we're working on this patch that basically like takes in the data from the fabric and does a little machine learning magic neural network shit to kind of translate the like complex motion of this fabric into these parameters in live. So that's like a whole nother category of the kind of shit you can do in Max. Yeah, yeah.
Because you can just put that in and then do anything you want with that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah. Sweet. I'll just keep taking any thoughts, questions that pop up.
Can you go back how to put what folder
Oh, yeah.
to put all the files in?
So I'm in live. I'm going to right-click user library. I'm going to say show in Finder. And then I have user library, MIDI tools. If it doesn't exist, you can create it. The question was, I can repeat the question. How do I install these things? User library, wherever that is located, I find the easiest way to do it is to go into live itself and click show in Finder. Because sometimes, and I've had a lot of my customers have this issue, sometimes your user library isn't where live thinks your user library is. So you have to make sure it's the one that live actually is looking for. Then you create this MIDI tools folder and then you put the devices in there. I think if they go anywhere in the user library it works, but for the purposes of keeping things clean. Are there any like new music heads, like people into like Philip Glass or like Steve Reich or anything like that? Yeah. So you know those Steve Reich ones where he had like the tape loops that were playing at different speeds? So he also, so I'll explain what those are. He did these pieces where he'd record some audio like somebody saying something, and he'd have two tape loops that were identical, the same length, that were just a loop of this like 5-second audio clip. And he played them back on two tape machines, and they were each panned hard right and left. So you can have one in each ear. And then the speed of each of, basically because the tape, I think he didn't even do this intentionally, but because the tape machines are just like not perfect, they don't play at exactly the same speed. So if you just play them for like a half an hour, they go out of phase and you get this crazy effect. So he kind of discovered that by accident, and then he started to make these pieces where he would write patterns that he'd have percussionists play, like a lot of mallet instrument kind of stuff. And then he would tell one of the musicians, play slightly slower than the other person who's playing the same pattern that you are, which is amazing that a person can play like 0.1 of a BPM slower than another person who's playing the exact same thing. So I made this device which does that. So if we start with, we're going to clone, let's do collision. We're going to clone collision, and I have a pattern here which I'm going to do some stuff to. And then I'm going to copy it so I have the exact same thing. And then I'm going to pan this. So we're getting the same as if we just played one of them pan center. But then I'll take this device called micro stretch, and I'm just going to stretch one of them like a very small amount. So that then they start to then go out of phase with one another. Now if I stand out here so I can hear it better. This one on the right is just going to fall slowly behind. Now it's like kind of extreme, you can hear it. And this is something you can technically do if you really get in there like super microscopically and do it manually, but this is like another one of these examples where it's like, what if you weren't as talented as the marimba player who can play at 0.1 of a BPM slower than the other guy? Then now you can, sort of. So I'm going to put my email up here if anybody wants to send me an idea or just ask a question. And I'll put my Instagram too. 2 underscores there. I'll have to buy the 1 underscore version from whoever has it.
First question is, how long does it stretch over time? Like, how long does it start going out of time for that?
So it's kind of hard to see, but so in this particular case, the phase will shift by 1/16th note. With this setting, the phase will shift by 1/16th note in 5,467.8 bars. And then basically as you shift this thing to the right, this number of how many bars is going to go down. So now it's 200 bars. And for them to be off by a 16th note is obviously a lot, right? So, and the, Ableton has like a stretch thing, which is kind of funny. Like they already have this, but it just like wasn't precise enough. Like it's too coarse. Okay. So all we needed was like a finer version of that. So that's all this is, and it will just tell you, like, giving you a rough idea. Because in fact, when Steve Reich, like for the piece drumming, I think the way that he actually describes the tempo change for that second musician is in terms of like how long it will take them to be off by a quarter note or something. Right. So that's the idea there.
Okay. My second inquiry was, I'm the type of person that likes to use a lot of drums, and I have like trouble kind of figuring out like what drums to bring front, like what drums to bring back. Like I'll almost have like a symphony of drums. So like I'm trying to think like what type of tool would be best used to kind of predict, what sounds would be best, on the front, and what sounds will be best, to be pulled back
in the mix.
Because I'm both making drums in MIDI, but also like finding drums on Splice,
right.
That type of thing.
So the one thing this can help you do, it can't really help you figure out which should go where, because it doesn't have any awareness of audio, right? But what it can do is make it easy for you to sort of make those transformations if you need something like velocity to do that, right? If it's like something that precedes mixing and you need to do it with velocity, then you could do that more easily. But that sounds to me like more of a sort of a mixing question, which these don't really help you with. One thing I would love to see these things be able to do is access the envelopes tab here in the clip. So like if I wanted to be able to change the filter cutoff of something, if I wanted to be able to change the envelope, ADSR parameters, like panning is one where I'm like, I use a lot of drums too, and like I always find myself wanting to be able to move stuff around, right? And I don't ideally don't want to just LFO the pan knob on something, because I would love to have it be where like when the note happens, a decision is made about where that thing's going to be placed in the stereo field and even in the mix, right? So that I can kind of have this sequence basically that's determining like perhaps over time how the position of an element within this kind of three-dimensional space of like front to back, side to side, where it's located. So that's one thing I really hope that they do. but again, right, it's not going to, somebody's calling me. It's not going to be able to answer that question as to what should go where.
Okay, that's fine.
One thing people have been asking about is like, what about an audio clip version of these? Maybe they'll do that. So you get a little bit like, if anybody's used Audacity, you get like Paul stretch in your Ableton would be kind of sick. Like offline audio effects. So maybe it'll do that too.
Could you show us the Turing?
Oh yeah.
device?
Okay, so Turing machine. So this is this one's kind of unusual. So there's a Eurorack module by this guy Tom Whitwell called Turing Machine. My phone keeps going off. That is based on this idea of a shift register. Basically, it's a random pattern generator. It's hard to explain exactly how it works, but these lights up here at the top determine both the pattern as well as the notes. So what I can do basically is kind of fill up this set of 8 slots with either 0 or 1. So I could like add a bunch of 1s, which is going to create notes. And then if I add some 0s, then I'm not going to get any notes. And then if I add some more 1s, then I'll get some more notes. And you can see the pitches are changing because actually what's happening is that this set of lights is actually being used to generate a number, like it's the binary representation of a number, right? So computers are all in 0s and 1s, whatever, right? So like we could have the number 4 is 001. So it basically uses that concept to generate for us both a rhythm and a melody and a series of pitches. And the original device is this kind of like beloved Eurorack module. It has some really cool features like this knob here. So typically the way that people will use it is they'll actually generate random bits. So in this case, I was just doing 0s or 1s. I was able to say literally like, should it be a new 0 or a new 0? But if I click this R button, I can actually just randomize. And this dial here, which they call the big knob, kind of controls how that randomness works. So if the knob is in the center, we're just going to get pure randomness. Well, 50% chance, coin flip, that we'll get a 0 or a 1. But if I push it all the way to the right, it's going to actually just continually reproducing this same pattern over and over again. So if I just keep pressing that random button, all we're doing is just shifting over this same pattern. If I push it all the way to the left, then it's going to shift it, but it will also invert it. By which I mean the 1s change to 0s and the 0s change to 1s. And what that basically does is make a pattern that's twice as long, because you get a bunch that are like the first way, then the inversion of that, then the inversion of that, then the inversion of that. So it's just another way to generate ideas. It's a little bit of a weird thing to pack into a MIDI tool like this because the original device is designed to kind of just like spontaneously produce MIDI notes, whereas this one is like pumping stuff out into this clip, and it has kind of a memory inside of it of like what these bits are. So it's a little bit weirder to use, but it's fun.
What do the weights do?
The weights change the pitches. So the weights basically will change what number gets generated here. And you just mess with it. You don't have to, I don't even remember, to be honest with you. And the range and the offset also are like the pitch. So the range is basically like what's the octave range. The offset is like where in the spectrum it lives. And then the weights are kind of like how within that range and offset do the specific pitches get chosen. Yeah, so that's that one. That one, it's weird. It's weird. I might change one thing about it, which is the pitch. So like, because this thing has a memory, if you change these parameters, it will only apply those changes to future stuff. So like, if I decide to change the offset, so now we're going to transpose things up, we're not transposing these, we're actually just going to transpose future stuff. So I think maybe the way to, it would be smart to change this so that this whole section actually will change what's already in there. So I think I might do that, but anyway. Let's hear what it did. Let's try, let's do pattern transform actually. One thing with these that's actually worth talking about is, so there's this idea of, so when we're doing these transformations with the transformers, as I change the parameters on here, you can see that the changes are just taking effect inside inside of the clip. And what it's doing is it's still transforming the original clip that was there at the beginning when you started doing the transformations, right? If I take a simpler example, so let me make, rather than some Turing machine stuff, just a good old-fashioned eighth note pulse. And if I come over to the divs, and I added this 16th note subdivision in here, if I change this to a 20th note subdivision, what I did was split the original note that was here in this slot before into 5 instead of splitting it into 4. If what I wanted to do, though, was change these notes, so if I wanted to split these into batches of 5, I need to tell the device, hey, actually start transforming this thing that is in front of us. And it's a little bit confusing, and it's another thing I hope that Ableton improves, is like, how do I know what's being transformed? Am I transforming the old thing or the new thing? And how do I get, like, I'm good now with this, I'm happy, now I want to transform this? The ways that you do it basically are if you leave the clip or change the device or manually edit the device, it's going to reset to what you're currently looking at. So a lot of times what I'll do is just like go over here and then come back. And now if I apply, then we have actually one that got sliced into 5 because we applied this set of settings to this new clip. So that's actually one thing that's helpful to know when you're using these transformers in general that can be a little bit confusing. And sometimes you will find that like it will transform something that you didn't actually want to. You wanted to transform the old thing. And if that's the case, then a Command Z is your friend. You just go back to whatever the old thing was, and then you can get it to do that. So a little bit of a cumbersome thing that I hope they fix. I think that what they need to do is just give you like a menu here that basically lets you pick like a version history of the clip. I have like a laundry list of feature requests for them that they mostly ignore, but hopefully.
So real quick, because you have the whole thing highlighted,
Yeah.
that's what subdivides that first part that you did, and then when you unhighlight and maybe select the second part, that's what subdivides the new part.
Basically, it was like leaving the clip and coming back.
Oh, okay.
But you actually got at something that's another important thing to talk about. So if I go back to just having one slider, I'm just going to divide all the clips here, right? But let's say I wanted to be more surgical, right? And I was like, oh, actually, you know, I only want to apply the transformation to these two. If I select those, I can actually like apply the transformation only to that region, which is really cool too.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess it's 7:45, huh? We could take maybe one or two more, if there are any more. Great. Well, this is my email. If you use these and make anything with them, I would love to hear it. I would love to hear it. Like, please. So. And yeah, if you have questions. There's also a Discord. Let me give you the link for that. I have a Discord server that people are in, and I'll give you the link to join that if you're a Discord person. Good place to ask questions. I will warn you, there's like a decent number of Max heads in there, so you will get a lot of like very obtuse kind of stuff like this. And if you're into Max, that's great, but don't let it scare you either. Invite, copy. There you go. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.